We're pleased today to have Max Ghenis, who is co-founder and CEO of PolicyEngine. Max has just released PolicyEngine US as of a few days ago, and he's here to demonstrate it for us. Max, take it away.
Thanks, Jason. Yeah, I'll go ahead and share my screen. Really great to be here with you all. And can you guys see this? Okay.
Looks great.
Cool. Yeah, so essentially PolicyEngine, we're a nonprofit that builds free open source software to compute the impact of public policy. And last year in October, we launched our product in the UK. And now just on Thursday, we launched on the US. So I'm going to share with you all just how that product works. So essentially, I'll talk about briefly what PolicyEngine and OpenFisca are. OpenFisca is the microsimulation model. We use PolicyEngine as the app. I'll give a demo of kind of a unique reform that I don't think has been conducted before, something that modifies both a benefit program and a tax program. So SNAP, the food stamp program, as well as an EITC reform. And also I will show the UK, which gives a preview of the kind of direction we'll be going in the US in the future, and some of the other future plans for what we're doing, as well as, if we have time, we might end up skipping this, but sort of a very brief tutorial on how OpenFisca US can reproduce some of what we talked about in the app. All right, so what is PolicyEngine? Our mission is to compute the impact of public policy for the world. So part of this has to do with building open source software that researchers and policy analysts can use, but also we really strive to make it easy enough for the public to use. And that's so that they can understand the public policy reforms that are being discussed in the wild, and also just make it more personal. Ultimately, we talk about society-wide impacts of public policy, but ultimately this affects everyone's net income at the end of the month. So we want to demonstrate that. And really what our app does is it kind of unifies a bunch of models. So models that start at the baseline of the data, survey microdata, administrative totals, and legislation. OpenFisca is a microsimulation platform that actually the French government created. And this is what we started building our model on top of in the UK last year, or maybe 2 years ago or so. And then in the future, we hope to integrate PSL kind models like OG Core, which is the overlapping generations general equilibrium model. We don't have that yet, but really our goal is to take these components, build our own sort of usable components on top of it. So enhanced microdata, we've developed some technology to fuse that data with random forests. We reweight our data with gradient descent, we forecast it, and also we build the microsimulation models for the US and the UK. And then all of this comes together in the actual user-facing app and the Python packages that underlie it. So we can sort of answer pretty simple questions with this, everything from how much food stamps am I eligible for, to on the UK side, we've done some pretty intricate reforms. So this is the UK, the Green Party released a manifesto in 2019, which was very far-reaching, everything from tax reform to UBI, to even like a land value tax, a carbon tax, and some new policies like this single pension or supplement. So we were able to work with them to really score the whole policy together and view that in an interactive app. So with that, I will head to the app and give you a tour. Here's what PolicyEngine.org looks like. And essentially, we really try to take you into the app as quickly as possible. So we have the US app and the UK app. So we'll just jump in here to the US. And here's what the app looks like. So on the left side, it really takes you into a household view. So you can specify everything about your household, from the structure, the number of people, location, your income. And then at the bottom here, you can see the results. So was your net income after taxes and benefits? And then we also show that as a function of how much you earn. On the top here, we'll change the public policy later. So you'll not just see your net income under the current law, but also under potential reforms. And that'll show up here as well on the right side. Can you see my mouse, by the way? My cursor? Okay, great. And here are some buttons that we'll use. So let's just do a simple household, let's say a single parent of one. Currently, we limit it to California because we've only implemented the SNAP program in California. A lot of these programs do vary by state, but you can enter some other specifics about your location. Let's also give them some expenses. So let's say they have $1,000 per month in housing costs, and let's give them some broadband costs as well. Let's say $50 per month. And all of these affect the benefits that they are eligible for. There's also some household level benefits that we allow you to input, and these also have to do with other benefits. A number of benefits depend on your receipt of other benefit programs. So we can just leave this as is for now. And now here's the part that has to do more with all the core taxes and benefits. How much do you earn? So we have a variety of income categories that you can enter. You can enter it for any member of the household. So if you were married, you might want to input income of your spouse. We can just leave it on the actual person here. And let's say they earn $3,000 per month, $36,000 per year. And we can leave the rest as is. Similarly, you can enter personal level benefits. So benefits that might vary on the individual. Here we can just leave this blank. Let's say they have no social security. Demographics, sometimes this has an impact as well. Let's say they're 30. And some of these benefit programs, we really do have to capture pretty detailed data, such as if you're breastfeeding or not, if you have a young child, that actually affects your the kind of benefit you get from the WIC program, which is a nutrition program for young mothers. But and there are also some personal benefits. So for example, your medical out-of-pocket expenses, those depend on the age of the person who's claiming it. So we have to ask that at the personal level instead of the household level. All right, so we've kind of entered everything we need to calculate the net income. And this is a function of your market income, your benefits, and then subtracting the taxes. So this person, we've got employment income, that's just what we entered, that's the entirety of the market income. Benefits, they get some. So there's an affordable connectivity program, that's a broadband subsidy of $30 per month. And this family is eligible for that. And they also have some tax liability. So, and that's really they have I guess, a positive tax liability from payroll taxes, negative from income taxes, and that's due to refundable credits. So total tax bill is $2,200 or so. So between all of that together, you get $34,000 or so in net income. And in reality, this might be higher because we haven't modeled all the benefits yet. Maybe they're eligible for a couple like TANF that we haven't implemented yet. But essentially, this is what we have here so far. And now we can actually look at some fancy charts. So see not just what they're eligible for today and their tax liability, but also how this would depend on how much they earn. So here is this gray line depicts where they are today. That's the $36,000 per year. So we can roughly zoom in on this and we see roughly that $34,000 net income we saw before. And you can kind of see there are a couple cliffs here. There's a small cliff and a bigger cliff. And it turns out that this big cliff is actually from the SNAP program. And this is big. We can actually zoom in. This is pretty sizable. So it goes from 35 to about 30. So over $5,000 is lost. And that's because right now, due to COVID, there are some emergency allotments in the SNAP program. And that means that if you're eligible for SNAP, you get the maximum benefit you get for your household size. Once you're no longer eligible, you lose the entirety of it. And that's why the cliff is so large, larger than it is under normal circumstances. And we'll sort of see that in a second when we reform the policy. We can also see the marginal tax rates here. So usually we think of sort of the standard progressive, mostly progressive tax code, that the marginal tax rate rises as you earn more. Benefits and refundable credits and things like that, they sort of change that so it's not as progressive or not as monotonic. So you have some higher marginal tax rates. In certain places, you have these infinite values are from the cliffs, and you can kind of see that all together here. So that is the sort of the current law view of PolicyEngine US. And you can always change things about your individual household to see different scenarios, but we're going to jump over to the policy page. And here we've got a few different categories of policy parameters that we can select from. So by default, it shows you SNAP parameters, but we have quite a few on the IRS side. So all this is basically organized by agency. On the IRS, we have the individual tax rates depending on the tax bracket, and also the marital status. Some parameters for the child tax credit as well. And this is what we're going to reform in a minute. So for example, eligibility in terms of age, amount, the phase out rates. And we actually have probably hundreds of parameters behind the scenes. We haven't exposed them all here yet. So when we showed and calculated that tax liability, that's actually pretty much the same sorts of calculations that you would use or you'd see from the PSL tax calculator package. We leveraged that because it was open source. It was relatively straightforward for us to reproduce it in our framework. So I think a really real victory for open source here. And over time, we're going to expose all of the parameters here. And now we can see things for SNAP. So eligibility, these are basically thresholds of as percentages of the poverty line. So in order to be eligible for SNAP, you have to have gross income of 130% or less of the poverty line. Turns out states have some flexibility in that. But then net income, which is sort of your gross income minus certain deductions that the SNAP program implements, that has to be below 100%. And there's a variety of different deductions here that affect your net income. You can also change the actual amount that you would get from SNAP. And then we've got some parameters on school meals and these broadband subsidies as well. So as promised, we're going to do kind of a strange reform, but I think a reform that actually reflects the kind of thought process that policymakers might have, where they're thinking of the tax system and the benefit system together. And certainly that affects households at the end of the day, if you think about both. So on the SNAP side, we're going to change this from 100% to 200% of the poverty line that makes you eligible for for SNAP in terms of net income. And we're also going to change the child tax credit amount. So we're going to double this from 2,000 to 4,000. And now we can go back to your household. All the household information is saved from before, so we can just jump to calculate your net income. And here we see the change in total net income is about $8,500. And that is the sum of SNAP and also some other programs. So if you recall, before we just had the Affordable Connectivity Program. That was the only benefit that they were eligible for. Now they are eligible for SNAP. And because if you're eligible for SNAP, that also entitles you to some other programs, free school meals and the Lifeline phone or broadband subsidy. They actually get about $6,500 total in new benefits throughout the year. So SNAP, they get that really small normal allotment, but because of COVID, they get another $5,300 per year from that emergency allotment, plus about 1,000 from school meals and Lifeline together. And on the tax side, as expected, their child tax credit goes up by $2,000 since the maximum was increased from $2,000 to $4,000. We can also go back to our chart and see how this responds to earnings. So here we've got the cliff is just before the cliff was roughly at 30,000 employment income. Now it's around 37,000 from SNAP. So we're just barely eligible, this household. If they earned a bit more, they'd lose the SNAP plus those other benefit programs we just saw, Lifeline and the free school meals. And then even aside from that, they do have higher income throughout the income distribution in general, except when they're ineligible for the child tax credit. And that's because of the CTC reform. We can also see the change to the marginal tax rates here. So it's mostly in this lower, sort of right below where we entered their income was. So that's roughly what we're doing on the PolicyEngine US side. I'm just going to hop over to PolicyEngine UK just to show how the UK impact page, and we'll eventually have a US impact. So here, the UK, we're more focused on the policymaker side right now because we have this society-wide impact we'll see. So the default page is the policy parameters, and we don't just have the existing law, we also have some contributed policy parameters. For example, you can implement a UBI. The Green Party had one of their custom parameters as well. Let's just do a really basic reform. So this is the first tax bracket. That first tax bracket in the UK is 20% normally, and we're going to cut that to 19%. This was actually just announced by the Chancellor a couple of weeks ago. So it's a real reform, and this is going to simulate over some microdata that we've put together what the impact is. So it's going to cost about $4 billion per year, not really affect the poverty rate substantially, and benefit about 68% of the public. And we've got more of a detailed budget breakdown, the poverty impact for each age group. So it's going to fall 0.4%, and it really doesn't have an impact on the deep poverty rate, which is the share of people below half the poverty line. We get some changes by decile. So on the relative impact, it is a bit regressive, and you can also see it on the absolute side. And then the share, instead of just looking at the average within each decile, we can look at the composition of each decile and see how many people come out ahead or behind. So higher income households are more likely to come out ahead from this reform than lower income households. And we can also see the inequality impact. So the Gini index would rise very slightly. The top 1% share, the share of total net income held by the top 1% actually falls slightly. So it's a little bit of a mixed picture in terms of total inequality impact. So over time, we are resourced to build something like this over the next year or two on the US side, plus more policy parameters, plus more states for the existing policies that we've implemented like SNAP. So over time, you'll be able to see all of that. We'll build the enhanced microdata, the US-wide impacts, benefit programs, everything from SSI to state taxes to the TANF program, and we'll put all of that into the same UI for everyone to use. And then I want to close just by sharing a bit of a vision on how we want to move longer term. And we really want to make this more democratic, the whole policymaking process. So you could imagine an app where you have a feed of policies, and these policies might come from your political parties in your country or think tanks or individuals. And it's going to show you both the individual personalized impact as well as a society-wide impact. So you can see all that together. You can drill into the policies to see some of the charts we just went through, and you can see all the policy reforms that individual organizations or just individuals have put forth as well. And you'll be able to create a policy from your phone too, which you can sort of do today, but I think we want to make this more and more accessible to lay people. So I think I will close there and happy to answer any of your questions.
Max, that was a great demonstration. I've got a question, but there's also one from Rick Evans, who's here and put in a chat too. He was kind of commenting on the user interface you showed for PolicyEngine US, and it looked like all the defaults were 0. Is that correct? And is that any kind of a barrier to kind of simulating the results for a particular household?
Like default income being 0, those kinds of things?
Right, yeah, I think that's it.
I was just looking as you were going through it, and all the presets were 0, and I just wanted to confirm if that's the case. Just when you come into PolicyEngine US, is everything preset to 0? Because if so, that means to do a simulation, you really have to go through every parameter option and set it.
Yeah, I think that's probably our best default. There may be some ways. For example, we actually in the UK, we have a carbon tax model, and this is really important there. Right now, we assume 0 across all consumption categories, which we know is not true. So you can imagine predicting based on your income and the other characteristics what someone's consumption of various categories are to estimate their carbon tax bill. We don't have that implemented yet. So I think we may have like a button where you can change it from 0 to the predicted value over time.
Along those lines, Max, you mentioned kind of adding more parameters like an underlying model using OpenFisca for the micro simulation, right? There's, like you mentioned, hundreds of parameters to adjust that represent different policies, both on the tax and benefit side. And you mentioned adding those to the interface. What are the challenges you see there in terms of, having really detailed view of the policy, on the other hand, making it easy and accessible for a typical user?
Yeah, we're trying to think through different use cases there. I think on the household side, sort of to Rick's question, I think we can make it a bit more linear, just ask people for a few high-level features of their household, their structure, their income, and maybe their state, and we can get 90% of their taxes and benefits from that. On the policymaker side, I don't think it's going to be as linear in general. So what we're thinking of doing is replacing that set of dropdowns, which is going to get just overwhelming, with a search interface. So you could search for a parameter and just look for all the parameters that match that criteria, and you can change that from there. The other thing that's going to make it easier over time for people who want to design policy is to have some policies to start with. So, that feed that I presented at the end, you could imagine going in, looking at some interesting policy, just clicking on it instead of building one from scratch, and maybe you tweak it. So you can say, okay, I kind of like this policy, but I'm going to change the tax rate from 20% to 19% in addition to that policy. And then you can publish that too. So.
Good ideas. And then, so the UK version that you've kind of released last year and also gave a demo day on, and I'll link to that in the YouTube notes for this video. What have you kind of found in terms of differences? I'm interested in, building up in particular those benefits policies. I mean, you went through the SNAP benefits and it's super detailed, everything from like living on tribal lands to are you breastfeeding and so on. And if you can just like over the differences in building that out for the US versus the UK, and is it that much more complicated here in the US than in the UK, or what's your perspective?
Yeah, I think it is. Yeah, both on the tax and benefit side. And this is partially, I'd say it's mostly due to the state level. We sort of have 52 different state and benefit policy suites, 50 states, DC, and the US.
And that's just for the federal benefits too. It's not like these are state necessarily funded. It's money coming from the federal government, right? Going to 52 different jurisdictions.
Yeah, well, and even that, you have like TANF, which is a state block grant program. So states, it's sort of funded by the federal government, but there's a lot of control. But even just the federal tax system in the US is a lot more complicated than the UK. We have a lot more deductions and credits, a lot more corner cases. So, and it's not as like nice in terms of the interface to find that information. The UK actually has a really great legislation explorer where you can look at the snapshot of different policies and sets of laws over time. So yeah, kind of on a number of dimensions, the UK was a good place for us to start and work up to the US.
That's great work, Max. Any other questions, Rick?
No, thanks a ton. That was really cool.
Cool. Thank you, guys.
Max, yeah, great demo. Look forward to using it.
Great.
Thanks a lot.